Today we look at sports trending topics in Africa and around the world. Is Floyd Mayweather really the best? And while the Barcelona trio set a season goal record, Dortmund and Liverpool see their own hopes dashed. They say the art of conversation is to talk about the right thing at the right time, and this is the right place. You're watching The Conversation. Welcome to The Conversation. I'm Jeanette Kwayke. In the studio with me is Sports News Africa's very own Ehi Alonge to talk about the sports topics trending in social media. Hello.
Hi, Jeanette.
With the Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao fight now just days away, Muhammad Ali, or at least his representatives, are taking a moment to put to rest all this Mayweather is better than Ali nonsense. So, Ehi, a big fight coming up. Let's talk about it. What are the people saying? What's the social network saying?
Well, I think that, as we get closer and closer to the fight, I think it's just quite clear. I think the best way to sum it up, both for casual sports fans, fans in America, fans in Africa, fans everywhere, is that most people voting with their heart want Manny to win. I think a lot of that is possibly even linked to what we're seeing with the Ali tweet, or the claim to be the best ever. I think Mayweather's personality rubs people up the wrong way. So most people are voting with their heart and saying Manny to win. But when they then think about it and they use their head, most people are saying, look, Floyd Mayweather is 47-0. He's beaten all comers. He's never drawn. His last loss was as an amateur at the Olympics in what was a swindle of a result. So I think it's most people heart Manny, head Floyd.
But Floyd Mayweather has this personality that just, like you say, rubs people up the wrong way. Why doesn't he just try and humble himself a little bit?
Well, I actually saw an interview with him the other day, and to be fair, he made the point where he said, well, he is humble because his money is earned. So as far as he's concerned, I mean, you look at it in his boxing record, he is 47-0, which does entitle him to say he's the best ever. And he's won of multiple weight divisions. He's never even come close to losing. And then when you talk about his money, yes, it is an attitudinal thing. They both had difficult starts in life. Pacquiao grew up in terrible poverty in the Philippines. And Mayweather, yes, we have a vision perhaps of the opportunities that America offers, but let's not get away from the fact that his start in life was also very difficult. So I guess he feels he owes nobody anything. Everything he's got, he's earned. And that's how he sees his humility. Of course, with the Bugattis and the Vegas trips and the $100,000 gambling sort of whizzes, I think even he accepts that he might be doing that. But as he says, if you don't like him and want him to win, you pay for the fight. If you do like him and, if you do or don't like him, pay for the fight, watch it, win or lose, he gets the money. So he's not really bothered either way.
And that appears to be the thing, right? It's a win-win situation for Mayweather regardless.
Well, look, as we stand, he's going to make $180 million for what could be 3 punches on Saturday. I mean, Pacquiao will also make 120, so he's not exactly being sort of ignored in this, financially speaking. But for me as a fan, I'm also like, the question is if Mayweather's already taken the sting out the O, he's come out in the press in recent days talking about being a businessman and everything, and people are now picking up the fact that he's almost caging his bets and saying, well, I might lose the O, but it's not about that. It's always been about money. And I actually agree, because I think maybe the best thing for both fighters in this will either be a controversial loss for Mayweather, which would lead to big calls for a rematch, or a draw, in which case more people want to see who wins next. So either way, they've won. I mean, after $120 million as a least figure, you've won.
And Floyd Mayweather's father's come out and said after this fight, Mayweather should just knock it on the head and retire. Do you agree with that?
As a boxing fan, I'd like to see him go for the 50-0. I think it's a nice round number. It gets him past Rocky Marciano's record, which is 49-0. But once he's beaten Mayweather, I think maybe Amir Khan, possibly maybe a rematch against Tito Ortiz. But apart from that, I can't really see there being any real need to do anything other than to get to the 50-0. So
It's
if he
going
wants
to
to
be
go, he can go.
interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. This Saturday coming up, if you can stay up, that is. Wow, we're moving to football now. And Super Falcons and Liverpool ladies forward Asisat Oshoala is one of the 5 players nominated for the first BBC Woman Footballer of the Year award. Asisat was named along Brazil's Marta, Spain's Veronica Buquet, Nadine Kessler of Germany and Kim Little of Scotland in the inaugural award, billed to be announced on May 26 after a poll from listeners across the globe. So Ehi, let's talk about Asisat because she's come over from Nigeria. It's a new thing to have female African footballers in the Women's Super League. How do you think she's getting on?
I mean, the fact that she's nominated tells us that she's getting on just fine. But, I mean, it's not just about the fact that she is a female African footballer. This is a lady who was Player of the Year and top scorer last year at the Under-20 World Cup. And she was also the Player of the Year and top scorer of the African Nations Championship. Heading into this year, Nigeria looking in a good position for Canada 2015, the sort of full age or full division World Cup. And the thing with women's football is it's quite interesting. In pockets, in countries around the world, for instance, Nigeria, who have been dominating African women's football for a while. You look at America, you look at Brazil. Women's football is almost as big, or maybe particularly in America, possibly even bigger than the men's game. Probably that is changing in America. So I guess within the global trend, it's not so much of a challenge, or it's not so much of a surprise that it's Asisat that's coming through, because she is actually very good. I mean, she has dominated international tournaments. She has proved herself, and so far this season for Liverpool, give or take that maybe the WSL is not something that most people know about. And I think for most African football fans, it's the fact that she's at Liverpool that they'll hold on to, because possibly you could argue the French Women's Football League is stronger. You could definitely argue the Swedish Women's Football League is stronger. But at Liverpool, she has been a key player. It's a very interesting, because now in the Women's League in British football, more of the established Premier League clubs seem to be taking it seriously. Man City have invested in, Arsenal have had a long history of investing in their own women's side. Birmingham, Everton have also come through as strong squads. So for her to stand out when more clubs are taking it seriously, better players are coming into the leagues, better training, better facilities, I just think it's a credit to her. And
of course, it's the Women's World Cup in Canada this year. She's in a strong category in that particular Women's Football Award. Who do you think will be the biggest competition for her?
I think just historically, you're looking at someone like Marta. I think it's just basic name recognition. If like me, a few years you were guilty of just maybe glimpsing through women's football and not taking out, she stood up. So did Hope Solo, who I know has had a few off the pitch problems in her personal life, and wish her well sorting those out. So I guess Marta would always be there, just because Marta is the established name. It would be a bit like, I don't know, like a James Rodriguez taking on a Messi. I think there's always that sort of thing going on. So at least
we know who you're going to be voting for then.
Well, I mean, not just me. I'm hoping everybody goes to the BBC website and everybody votes on that, because it is it's also a really good uplifting story to have her come from nowhere. I know she's got the nickname Sadov, but I promise you that's because she's an absolutely brilliant footballer. Okay. And is due the award.
Well, as you heard from Ehi, make sure you do go out there and vote for the BBC Women Footballer of the Year award, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the conversation. Barcelona coach Luis Enrique says it's impossible to choose a favourite goal after his front three all scored crackers in Tuesday's 6-0 win over Getafe at Camp Nou. The South American trio of Neymar, Suarez and Messi have now scored 102 goals between them this season. "102 goals, Ehi."
I mean, the thing that's more amazing for me, because Barcelona have previously had a trio that scored 100 goals. It involved Africa's own legendary Samuel Eto'o, playing up front with Henry, and I think it was Messi at that time. But that was over a course of a season. Now you're looking at this number of goals where Suarez wasn't available as part of that triumvirate for most of the start of the season, but Suarez is always banned at the start of the season, so I guess not so much of a surprise. But it's also the quality of goals and the fact that they're coming off last season, they had a lot of questions to answer. Atletico had won the league, Real Madrid had won the Decima and won the European Cup. So I guess for that triumvirate to really stand out and pull the club through has been spectacular, and it really has been difficult to pick who is more influential over the course of the season, because Suarez has come with the goals, Neymar's filled in when Suarez wasn't there. He's as good as Messi in some situations, so it's a really fantastic achievement.
And I think the scary thing with those three is that all three of them have come together and they're super fit right towards the end of the season, and there's no slowing down.
There's absolutely no slowing down. I mean, if you look at the top of the league and now, Real Madrid are 2 points behind them. Atletico Madrid, reigning champions, are further back and probably out of the race. So we're back into the usual two-horse race. But the team spirit, the camaraderie is clearly stronger at Madrid. Those three players seem to be playing for each other, whereas anyone who even watched Madrid last night, for instance, would have seen Cristiano Ronaldo upset because a teammate scored when he could have scored. And I think it's just, they embody that very more than a club ethos that Barcelona have.
How many lessons do you think that someone like Suarez has taken from the Premier League to the Spanish La Liga?
It's difficult to say. I think in the Premier League, there's obviously a greater degree of physicality. And if you look at Suarez's style of play, he's very aggressive with defenders when they're on the ball. And beyond that, also, he's probably lost some of that diving element that he brought in. And I think what defenders, and I've watched a couple of Barcelona games, and I've seen a couple of times where he's taken a hit, and it's almost like the defenders expect him to go down, but he battles on. So whether that's because of the Premier League or whether that's actually he's just a tough South American hombre and he's playing his natural game, I don't know. But definitely the never say die attitude of the Premiership is there. But then you look at it, I mean, Barcelona, do they really have much to learn from the Premier League? I'd argue over the last few years, probably not much. I think the Premier League has a lot more to learn from them, if I'm honest.
So Barcelona, you'll know they're going into quite another big match now in the Champions League, and they're going to be facing Bayern.
Yes.
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal because it's the return of Pep. It's his former, I mean, essentially it's where he was made and where he probably remade a club to where he's actually completely rebranding and repositioning a club like Bayern. So the challenge is there. I mean, who wins? I don't know. For me, with the front three of Messi, Suarez and Neymar, even if you stopped two, whoever's left can do so much damage on their own to any team in any level of the game that you can't look really beyond Barca walking through the stage.
We're going to have a look a bit more at Bayern now. In fact, Gabon's Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang scored a 75th minute equaliser as Borussia Dortmund ended Bayern Munich's quest for a treble just last night. And after finishing 1-1 at the end of extra time, Dortmund went on to win the penalty shootout 2-0 to advance to the final of the German Cup. So Bayern, almost the equivalent to Chelsea, they were chasing title after title this season, but Borussia Dortmund have stopped that now. What do you think about that?
I always think it's quite unlucky for Bayern because I think, to be fair, Bayern are in essentially a one-horse race of a league. I think if they really want to make it interesting, they should probably think about not buying players from the closest rivals, especially Dortmund. But it was just interesting. I think at the moment they've already won the league title. They're saving themselves possibly for a showdown with Barcelona, which is obviously a two-legged affair in the Champions League. But for Dortmund, I think with Klopp leaving, I think there's probably just emotionally a bit more riding on that game. And you could really see it when you watch the way the players chased through to the end. It wasn't just the Aubameyang. Right across the team, the Dortmund boys were really going for it. And I felt that at one point the Bayern guys, probably with an eye to taking on the team we've just spoken about, Barcelona, were probably just saving themselves towards the end. And also they've just not had to raise their game that often when facing German opposition all season. And
it's interesting you say that the Bundesliga could be more exciting. What else would you do to make it more exciting?
Well, I mean, the thing is, from everything we see that the Bundesliga, often in European football, is held up as a good model. Tickets are accessible to most fans, pricing is fairer. Even Bayern only have 12 sponsors as opposed to like a Man United that has probably 12 per country around the world. So it's seen as this much more egalitarian, but it isn't, because actually what happens is every time you get a look at Lewandowski, other players, once you're good in any other team in Germany, you get bought. Mario Götze was the same. So what would I do? I guess I'd pray, if I was a German fan, I'd pray for an oligarch to come into a team like Dortmund, give them a lot of money that he doesn't feel he wants to spend before he passes away, and hope that you can buy in the players. But generally, I think it's quite established, and I don't think there's any silver bullet that's going to make it more interesting. You saw what Klopp managed to do with Dortmund, to take them to challenge Bayern over 2 years, but then you saw that Bayern's response was just to buy their best players. Yeah. So, unless you're going to stop Bayern and restrict that trade or restrict that access, I don't really see what the solution is.
It's quite a tricky one, isn't it? And let's speak a little bit about Klopp and he's leaving now. What do you think that's going to change?
I think it's going to make the league. Well, I think it's actually going to make the Bundesliga a bit less interesting, because he was, as an individual, he was a real conductor of media attention, and he was a real star in the league. Despite the way his team played, even against Arsenal and people like that, he said he prefers rock and roll to the classical styles of the big teams in Europe. So he had a real attitude, and maybe. For me, I'd like to see him in the Premiership. I know that we're going to talk about Liverpool in a bit, but that's where I'd like to see him, because I really think that whether or not the teams do well in Europe, the Premiership as a league is the best league, because the bottom can beat the top. Teams play for 90 minutes. It's blood and thunder. It's all go, and I think it will really suit him.
Okay, like you said, we are going to be speaking a little bit more about Liverpool, especially when we come back after the break, so make sure you stay tuned. Welcome back to the conversation. Now, Hull City have moved 4 points clear of the relegation zone with a win which leaves Liverpool almost certain to miss out on Champions League qualification. And will the empty seats stir action from the Premier League as supporters say enough is enough? Ehi, Liverpool fans are not happy. Why aren't they happy? What's the problem?
Well, I mean, let's first start on the pitch and look off the pitch. On the pitch, they've spent 100 million plus since the sale of SUAREZ. And I know Sturridge's injury has been key. He's out for the rest of the season. So they haven't really been able to replace that firepower. Balotelli hasn't worked. Lovren and some of their bigger signings haven't gelled. And ironically, 2 years ago, when talking about Tottenham, their manager, Brendan Rodgers, says if you spend 100 million and don't make the Champions League, serious questions need to be asked. And now he finds in that situation, suggesting no one asks him any questions. It's all in line. So that's what's happening on the pitch. But off the pitch, it's not just Liverpool fans. I think right across the Premier League, in fact, maybe the top two divisions in English football, and bearing in mind what we just said about Bundesliga, the fans are really feeling the squeeze. And, the average cost of attending a game if you've got a family is now rocketed. So with two children, you're looking at £200-300, including travel, especially for away days. So they're looking for assistance from a league which is making so much money from television. Yeah. And the fans' argument is that apart from what happens on the pitch, the noise they make off the pitch, the atmosphere in English stadia is part of what makes the game attractive. Absolutely. So if clubs aren't going to look after them, then they're going to have to play in front of empty stadia. And then you only have to look at Serie A for what happens when fans get turned away from the game to see the real danger that if the Premier League doesn't react.
And we saw that just very briefly in some of the tweets. They say they're supporters, not customers. They called the boycott of not going to that game a success. Now, West Ham have very recently lowered the price of their season ticket once they move into the Olympic Stadium. Should other clubs be taking that stance?
Well, ironically or strangely, West Ham did get some heat for doing that from other clubs, because the club suggested that if you move into a subsidised stadium, then it's very easy to lower seats. And also, West Ham probably don't have, which is probably disparaging to West Ham. I know a lot of Hammers fans, but they suggested West Ham don't have enough fans to fill that stadium in regularly. So that's part of what they're doing. But yes, of course, if you're going to sign that sort of deal, you need to look after your fans, and you need to have a pricing system that rewards fans either for turning up or as weighted to sort of games. But I guess fans are just complaining because in life, as in football, they're generally feeling the squeeze. And a football club isn't an experience for these guys. It's part of their day. They live and breathe the club, probably even more so than some of the club owners do. For him, it's just an investment. You look at arguably Mike Ashley up in Newcastle, is pretty much treated as an advertising space as opposed to a club that he's really nurturing. So that might be part of the problem.
And we've got an issue now. Of course, Liverpool aren't going to hope. Well, they might not make the Champions League.
They will not.
Okay, I was trying. They're not going to play in Champions League next year. The supporters, again, is something they're not going to be happy about.
I've got 2 words for those Liverpool supporters. Jurgen Klopp. That is the answer to your problems, because even if you don't make the Champions League, it's a fresh start, because Rodgers is good. I mean, Brendan Rodgers is good, and he's pushed the club quite far. He's revolutionised it, he's stabilised it, and he's revolutionised it on-field play, and worked very close with his owners from the North East Sports Network, the Americans who own the club, to really help re-commercialise and give it a breath of fresh air. But now you've got to start winning. Yeah. And I just have this feeling that Brendan Rodgers, great guy, but I think he's got to the level he can with that club, unless he's given, again, another massive amount of money to spend.
So we know your stance. Brendan Rodgers out, Jurgen Klopp in. Wow. And finally, Kalusha Bwalia, head of Football Association for Zambia, led other soccer-loving Zambians in laying refs at the graveside of departed players in Lusaka, added that the pain of losing the entire team in the airplane disaster of 1993 will remain forever. Soccer fan and resident Jeffrey Ziambo had this to say.
They died in service, so it's important that they are remembered, because they brought glory to Zambia, and they were in the national team. And for the sake of our records and our history as a country, and for those that were not there at that time, it's important that such events are there so that they know exactly what happened during that time. So government needs more involvement.
Now, Ehi, you know, it's still a very sad situation. It's 22 years now gone, and it was a terrible, terrible disaster. And as we just heard on the VT there from Jeffrey, it's something that should be remembered. What do you think about all of this?
Again, you're completely right. It is a very sad situation that happened, and I know it was back in '96. And when it happened, it was a real shock. I mean, it wasn't the first time. I mean, probably for me, you know, and some Man United fans out there might remember, you know, the '58 and whatever else. But it was a real shock, because it was tied into international football. It was an entire team, apart from Kalusha, who was flying in from Europe and not from Zambia to Senegal at the time. And I know that there's some tension with the government, but I think the focus, which some people are trying to bring it to, is about continuing to support the commemoration of the event. And whilst I understand fully, and in some ways support the government, saying, look, this is now a private family affair, you know, you guys commemorate as you want, I don't think the government should be allowed to do that until they publish a report into what actually happened, because this was a government plane, it was a military plane, it was a government-sanctioned flight, and you've done the investigation, and it was 22 years ago. So with the passage of time, if you want to pull out of it as a government, you have to make sure that people know what happened.
Yeah, and that much I understand, but do we ever feel we'll, you know, without getting too political, do we ever feel we'll get that report?
I don't think so, because it was a military plane, it was a different time, it was a different government, and you know, there's so many conspiracy theories that have been flying around about this issue, that I really think that the government, in order to lay it to rest, either has to make somebody accountable and has to have a straw man for everybody to point out and go, it was your fault, which might offer the family some closure. But you know, you're looking at it even in British football, with the Hillsborough disaster being reinvestigated in British football, that sometimes the passage of time doesn't actually afford any greater clarity. And what people want is closure. What the families want is closure, which is just to know why, or at least as close to the truth as they can. And I think it's up to the government to provide that for them.
But the government so far have only really paid them half of the compensation that they've been, you know, offered. Why do you think that is?
Unfortunately, there's a few general trends that run through any sort of government-private sector relationship, not just in Africa, in any government in the world. And why that is, again, the government has to explain. You know, we will speculate whether it's corruption, we will speculate whether somebody's hiding something or whatever. But again, it's just, you've got to, I'm almost, from my position, my advice to the Zambian government, if you're watching, is it's not about the general fan, it's not about the others, it is about the families of these guys who passed away. And you've got to make sure that you do, it's not that many people, you're not having to look after 1 million families. It's the families of those guys who looked away. Give them what they do, give them the truth, and after that, how they choose to address that, it's up to them. It's not about the wider community at this point. You've really got to address the needs of those families.
A very sad state of affairs 22 years ago, 1993, that Zambian plane disaster. Now, don't forget, you can follow us here on The Conversation on Twitter and on Facebook to post your own opinions and queries. It's time to start Africa's sporting conversation.